So yeah, welcome to SailGP. Some of you may have heard of us from the past. So we've actually been in Cowes on the Isle of Wight in 2019. And we recently then, in 2021, 2022, we came to Plymouth. And we've had an absence in the UK for the last two and a bit years. So we're back in Portsmouth for the first time since Plymouth in 2022. So really looking forward to getting the British, not just sailing and boating fans behind us, but also just members of the general public as well. So a bit of a deep dive. Where did SailGP come from? So 2013, some of you may recognize this image. This was in San Francisco. This was probably 2012, this image was taken, but this was the America's Cup. And some of you may remember this event in Portsmouth in 2016. Now, these boats here are 72-foot catamarans. And when they designed this 72-foot boat, they were never designed to actually foil above the water. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that tiny little bit of carbon fiber. And the whole boat is literally flying on that bit of carbon. And when the Oracle designers saw this, the image of the New Zealand team who they're competing against, flying and foiling for the first time, the top designer thought that the image was photoshopped and kind of ripped the page up and threw it in the bin. So it's amazing where the sport has come from. You know, this concept of foiling was really kind of not believed to be possible on a catamaran a few years ago. And they were foiling well before this, but not as efficiently as we are today. Now, some of you on the call may recognize this image, and hopefully the image has changed slides. This was in 2016, different event to SailGP. This is the America's Cup World Series event. And the lovely flags in the background representing which teams are competing. And this was actually taken part in South Sea. On the common there, one of the largest attended events in the history of our sport, and it was helped that the British team led by Ben Ainsley won the event. So there's a really good patriotic kind of support and feeling after the event. Now that transpired to the boats being developed into a boat called the AC50 at the time. And this was held in Bermuda, and this is the British team that were competing for that America's Cup. Now, the event a lot of the SailGP CEO, Russell Coutts, was working for, sadly lost the event to the New Zealand team. And what Russell has done since this day is taken 5 of the boats that were competing in Bermuda, stripped them down to the bare carbon, the bare hull, and then basically developed a global sailing league, which is more akin to Formula One. So a traveling circuit that goes around the world. And we now have 12 teams competing who just turned up, actually. The boats have just landed in Portsmouth in Southampton and are being built as we do this presentation. So this is what it looks like today. This is the scene we're expecting just off South Sea, 12 international teams competing on identical 50-foot foiling sailboats. So 5 of those boats, or actually 6 of those boats, were from that 2017 event, and then 6 of them are brand new. And the boats have been made identical, so that there's no differences on the boat. If you change one button on one boat, every single button needs to change on every team, no matter how small the bit of element of the boat is. So SailGP is a nation versus nation competition. It's 14 minutes per race. Now, for any of you who sail on the call, sailing normally lasts about an hour for a race. In that prior event, they were 45 minutes. And the chief broadcaster from CBS came up to Russell Coutts and said, look, your entire sailing audience, your entire broadcast audience, pardon me, stops watching after 21 minutes. So what Russell did was change the racing to become under 20 minutes. And that's keeping the sport of sailing really popular with people who don't understand or don't follow sailing normally. There's also going to be four fleet races, four races of all 12 teams on the 19th of July, on the Saturday. And on the Sunday, there'll be, Sunday the 20th, there'll be three fleet races. So all 12 teams competing in three different races. So super engaging for us. We're not just watching one long race throughout the day. Now, some of you may know this. Traditionally in sailing, you could actually lose the last race of the competition, but win the overall regatta. Now, in SailGP, if you win the last race, so whoever wins the last race in Portsmouth will win the Emirates Grand Prix. So what happens in the last race on the 20th, on the Sunday, the top three teams will compete against each other to win the Portsmouth Grand Prix. Now, just to add a bit more pressure, they've thrown in a $2 million prize purse for the overall winner of the season. And that, you know, for the first time in sailing, the individual athletes are getting probably the same funding as a professional rugby player. So, you know, they're really being able to, you know, survive in a sport and really, you know, flourish, to be honest with you, compared to some other sports. So the teams that are competing, we've got the Flying Roos in Australia. They've just been bought out by that famous Wrexham team owner, Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman, led by Tom Slingsby. You've got the Brazilian team. They're the only team driven by a female skipper called Martini Grail. She's just incredible. You've got the Canadian team, who have been in very good form recently. The Danish team, who've never actually won an event, but they've done a great job of coming third multiple times, but never actually converted that into winning a Grand Prix. Then you've got the young Spanish team. They recently won in New York, and the reigning gold medalists in the 49er class from the Olympics. The French team are one to watch out for, so keep an eye out for them. The US team, super talented team, but they've struggled a little bit recently with getting used to these new hydrofoils, which I'll come on to later. The Swiss team, all very good lake sailors. They need to come up and step up to having a good regatta. The New Zealand team are the team that are the current America's Cup winners, but came second in New York, a team to watch out for in Portsmouth. The Italian team, again, a very good team, but new to the league this year. And then you've got the German team, again, been here for 3 seasons, so they need to step up to the mark. And part of the reason of getting this this presentation is a great opportunity for us to get behind the British team. So Dylan Fletcher is the driver. Hannah Mills is a triple Olympic medalist. She is phenomenal. And some of you may be expecting Ben Ainsley, but actually Ben Ainsley is the team owner. So Sir Ben Ainsley owns the team and is the one coordinating. He's a bit like, you know, a bit like a football team manager now. He's deciding who's on the team and how he's strategizing against the rest. Now, I mentioned if any of you are really keen, you'd be tracking the charter ship that's just turned up into ABP Port in Southampton. And there's 110 40-foot shipping containers that have just landed in the UK, all owned by SailGP. Now, this image you see here is our global calendar for 2025. And we can't actually physically fit in any more events because we're constrained by the global shipping movement and trying to keep the race within a summer season when we go to a venue. So we've just come from New York, event 7 you see on the screen, landed in Portsmouth. The boats are being bumped in. Normally takes about 10 days to bump the containers in and unload the boats, create the tented structure needed to house all of the teams. And then we normally will have the racing on the 19th and 20th, and then we pack up then for 7 days, and then we shoo on to the next event, which will be in Sassnitz in Germany. So it's pretty incredible. The entire boat, the entire 50-foot sailing boat, was designed to fit into a 40-foot shipping container, which is just remarkable. So talking of which, the other star of the show is the F50, foiling 50-foot catamaran. The boat weighs about 2.4 metric tons. Now, some of you on the call may own a boat if you're part of Premier Marinas, and you'll know how heavy your boats are. That's remarkably light for a 50-foot catamaran. Full carbon fiber. All the metal components are made of titanium. The jib is a carbon fiber laminate. The wing sail is a carbon fiber structure with a Kleisler, kind of like a plastic material that we'll come on to in a second. And the boats have done over 55 knots of boat speed. So in I should say, maybe not old money, 63 miles an hour, new money, 102 kilometers an hour. So incredibly quick considering it's just using the wind. So if you look very closely at this diagram, you can see here, there's a green section to the front of the boat. That section is designed to crash and come off the boat if it collides with another vessel. And secretly, there's a hairline split that goes down that section, kind of where the green and grey or black join. And that's about a 10-foot section. And that's where it joins and allows the boat to fit into a 40-foot shipping container. So the whole hull is modular, splits into about 7 parts to go into the container. And equally, the wing sail does the same, which I'll come on to in a second. This is the configuration on board the boat. So as all of you probably know in sailing, you use the weight of the sailors to counter the power and the force of the wind. So the sailors are normally running across the trampoline to get to the other side to counterbalance the weight, the force of the wind. So what you can see in this image is just one of the identical cockpits that the sailors sit within. And on the screen, positions 1 and 2 are the grinders. Now they're turning a traditional grinder, which runs a pedestal. And that is given power to position 4 on the boat. That's just like a traditional grinder in any sailboat you've seen from 30 years ago. Position 2 controls the front sail, the jib, and they've got a hydraulic foot pedal that pulls it in and lets it out. The positions 1 and 2 also control the shape of the big wing sail when they tack and jibe, which I'll come on to. Now, some of you, this is kind of a 3-dimensional version of sailing. Position 3 actually flies the boat up and down. So normal sailing, we go to port, go to starboard, we pull the sail in and out. Position 3 is fully focused on trimming the boat up and down, a bit like a yoke on an aeroplane. If you push the flight controller forwards, it rolls down. If you pull it backwards, the boat lifts up. The higher you fly the boat, the faster you go. But be careful, if you fly it too high, the boat will crash. Position 4 is in charge of this monstrous wing sail, which we have a couple of slides on. Position 5 is the driver, so purely controlling the kind of lefts and rights, the ports and starboards. If you look very closely at the diagram of the wheel, you can see a little twist grip on the wheel, and kind of like a motorcycle twist grip, and that allows the boat to also fly up and down when position 3 is running across to the other side. And last but not least is the strategist, who is actively talking to the race coach. The coaches for SailGP are now all based on the land. When we were last in Plymouth and Cowes, the coaches were riding around in a rib chasing after the boats in the water. So we've moved that entirely onto the land. This is a cockpit view of what the flight controller looks like. So instead of a yoke that pushes forward and pulls back, they actually roll these individual wheels, and that controls the pitch of every one of the hydrofoils on board the boat. I'll come on to the hydrofoils in about 3 slides. This is the wing sail. Now, every single day that we launch in Southampton, some of you who are closer to Gosport, you'll see the boats come around the kind of the Leon Solent area and around that headland and into kind of the kind of race area in Portsmouth. Every single of the wings is rigid, so we have to actually crane all 12 wings up in the sky, connect them to the boats, and then launch them into the water on a daily basis. And then at the end of the race day, all teams will recover back to the port, and we have to take the wing and boat back to the shore, take them down and store them in a tent, just like this image here. Now, the reason we use a rigid wing sail is the ability for the wing to bend the wind without stalling the wind rolling over the sail. Some of you on the call will own a sailboat, some of you may not. Now, the secret to any traditional sail is the more you bag the sail, the more you let your outhaul off, the more power you generate from a sail. The problem with a conventional traditional sail is if you let too much of that outhaul off and bag it too much, the sail will actually start stalling. So the secret to the wing is its ability to bend the wind without stalling. And the secret is that small gap you can see down the middle of the wing. At every single one of those black hinges you can see in the wing controller, which is position 4, can adjust the shape of the wing. In every maneuver, they have to invert that wing from starboard to port, and vice versa. This is what the wing looks like when it's upright. Now, one of our designers had a genius idea a couple of years ago to make the wing modular. So if there was too much wind on a race day, we could still race and we could still put a program on TV. So the wing you see on the right-hand side is the all-purpose wing. It's 24 meters high, and you can see it's got 4 panels. The wing you see on the left-hand side has got 3 panels, and that's only 18 meters high. So the idea of that is if it's blowing above 20 knots of true wind speed, say on Saturday, we'll probably use the wing sail on the left-hand side, and we have to make that decision a day beforehand. Most of you who sail, you'll do a stack reef or roller reef the sail. You can do that while you're sailing. In SailGP, we have to make the decision the day before. Now, we can also increase the size of the wing if the wind is very, very, very light. So it really depends on the forecast as to what we produce on race day. And every single team has to have the configuration that SailGP permits for the race day. So you can't have a different size wing if you fancy it. I'll quickly mention this. This is a hurricane mid-Atlantic, and just to give you an idea of the wind the sailors feel on their cheeks, when the boat is going upwind, the boat can develop about 64 knots of apparent wind, kind of like the fake wind you'll feel when you put your hand out of a car window in the M4. And 64 knots is the equivalent of a Category 1 hurricane. So the boat develops so much energy that's the feeling the sailors have on board the boat. So it's not the true wind speed. It's not the wind you feel with your finger when you stood still. It's the wind that the boat generates. It's the headwind the boat develops. Another interesting thing, since we were last in the UK, we used to have these carbon fiber hydrofoils. And this, if you look at the first image, this is what's in the water and foiling the boat, flying the boat above the water. And the boat only weighs 2.4 metric tons, but they actually recorded in the join of this hydrofoil over 7.6 metric tons of pressure in the foil. So the boat develops much more force through these foils than the boat actually weighs. Now, we used to have a GoPro camera looking into the water of the F50. And the GoPro camera, when the boat hit 50 miles an hour, 46 knots of boat speed, the seawater started boiling, boiling just like a kettle. And there was a small blob on the hydrofoil where the boat is basically vaporizing seawater. And what was happening, the thickness of the foil was slightly too wide, too thick for the water to pass over without generating a big low pressure area on the foil. So what SailGP has done for this season is developed a new design hydrofoil, and it's made out of milled titanium on the horizontal section you can see in the water. We only have one foil down and one foil up, and this foil is up at the moment. So there are two of these main foils on the boat. And you can also see a stripy little tip to the foil, which is a sacrificial tip in case the boat collides with another vessel while they're racing. And that was voted on the design by the sailors, not by the designer themselves. The new foil is a little bit thinner. It's about 12 to 15% thinner than the old foil. And that prevents that water boiling until about 55 knots. So the boat did 55 knots in testing the other day in San Francisco. And if you look at the third position back in the boat, that's the flight controller. You can see they're very focused, and they are trimming that hydrofoil forwards and backwards constantly. And quite often they come up after a race and they don't know where they are. They don't know where they're finishing the race because they are so intently focused on flying that boat efficiently. I thought as most of you are boaters in the call, I thought I'd just bring this up. When you hear the boats on the water, you hear this high-pitched whistling sound. It sounds like, our broadcaster and producer in season 1 thought the sailors were screaming, or it was the wind over the boat itself. But it's actually the sound coming off the hydrofoils that's making this high-pitched whistling sound, and it's called vortex shedding. It's kind of small areas, microscopic bits of air off the trailing edge of the foil that create that sound that you hear. Okay, a little bit onto the broadcast and the race course. SailGP owns the technology called Liveline, and this makes it much easier for us to watch the sport of sailing. Sailing is one of the most brilliant sports in the world because you're all about efficiency and getting from A to B in the most efficient time possible. Now that makes it incredibly difficult for somebody to watch sailboat racing because the boats are zigzagging and they're going in different directions. And if you don't sail, it's hard to track. So SailGP's developed this Liveline technology. It actually stems from the helicopter, which has a high frequency or a very, very accurate GPS. And it basically projects this onto the race course. Now, amazingly, some of the things that we also do, we have a remote broadcast that is actually held in Ealing in London. So when people were watching the broadcast like we see on this image in New York, it was being filmed by the helicopter, would go across the Atlantic to Ealing, and then they'd kind of splice the live broadcast with the overlapping of the commentary, and then it would go back across the Atlantic to New York, and that's what they're listening to. So SailGP has forged that. Many sporting events weren't doing a remote broadcast pre-COVID, and SailGP was a real leader in developing that particularly from a sustainability perspective, as much as a cost-saving perspective as well. Now, we also have umpires in SailGP. And in season 1, the umpires were bobbing up and down in Cowes. We had a really windy day in 2019, and they had a sore back after the racing. Now the umpires are all situated in Ealing and London, and they have something called an umpire app. You can just about see it on the screen here, and it's a 2D overlay, a bit like many of you will be watching Wimbledon at the moment. It's a bit like the virtual graphic or the virtual umpiring now in Wimbledon. SailGP has been driving that for about 6 years now, and that enables that team not to have to travel with the event. So if you hear the umpire's voice, say in New Zealand, they're up at 3 a.m. In the UK umpiring the event. And that's what their kind of green screen looks like without them in situ. And they have a nice big red button for every team, and they'll press that button if there's an umpire infringement. And the green button, something interesting for all of you on the call, if they hit the boundary of SailGP, a bit like the sidelines in a rugby match, or a football match, they give them a green penalty, which means they've hit the sideline and they have to slow down by 50 meters to the next competitor. Now, a couple of last slides. We've had a fair series of crashes in SailGP. You remember me talking about the crash bow section. Now, sadly, in the image here, the British team actually collided with the Japanese team, who are no longer competing, but behind the 10-foot bow section, and it wrote the entire boat off. And on the right-hand image, this was the Australian team. They actually hit a mark in SailGP a couple of years ago in New Zealand. Now, some of you are probably wondering why there's a propeller on that mark. All of the turning marks in SailGP have an electric, they're robotic. They have an electric engine on them. So somebody's job in SailGP, they have an iPad, and they literally drag their finger on the iPad to position the turning marks. So the turning marks have they're autonomous. They're running by themselves, and the electric engine literally pushes against either the wind or the tide, depending on the strongest element on the day. But pretty cool. And last but not least, of the 101 section, we had a massive failure in our wing mast in San Francisco 3 months ago. Now, really interesting. Some of you are based close to Southampton. We have a factory in Hedge End. We have over 80 staff on the floor there, building 2 new boats, looking after all of the wing sails. And it's the old Amazon warehouse in Hedge End. And that's where all of the technology and all of the boat building for SailGP has taken place. This team are a bunch of absolute legends. They were the ones who fixed the wing sails in time for the New York event and in time for Portsmouth for us to be ready. Which, you know, if you have any questions around that, feel free to fire away at the end. So what we're expecting in Portsmouth. Now, I know most of you are boaters. We haven't got an official boater program in Portsmouth this year, but on South Sea Common, we are expecting one of the largest ever sailing audiences in the history of sport. We think this image here is in Auckland. This was about 15,000 people across the weekend. At the moment, we are very close to being bigger than Auckland. So one of the reasons for, you know, getting the support from Premier Marinas and having yourselves on here, we want to make this Portsmouth event bigger than any event we've ever had. And it would be wonderful if anybody on the call can support us with raising that awareness by attending the event. Now, ways you can attend the event. There is no BYOB program this year, sadly. We are pushing for that next year, which will be an on-water program. Now, you can go on the water, but it's at your own risk. SailGP has no official program. There's a notice to mariners that's gone out there. And I would, you know, personally, I don't think it'll be the best experience this year. Normally, we allow boats to have a flag and come into the innards of the race course and have live commentary and what have you. So this year, we only have official spectating inside the race stadium. Which will be a grandstand ticket. It's about £60 odd, and there's a VIP premium ticket, which is about £300 odd, which is eat and drink as much as you like. Now, we'd encourage, if you are coming on the water, try and have a go in the race stadium on one day. If it looks a bit choppier on one day, come and give it a crack. We've got Tom Grennan playing on Saturday and Pete Tong playing on Sunday just after racing. And there's a load of activities to take part in the race stadium throughout the day as well. Race stadium will open at 2 p.m. on both Saturday and Sunday. Racing will start at 4 p.m., go on until about 5:30. It's a 1.5 hour broadcast. And then we'll finish with the music act after racing on both days of racing. So that's pretty much us. I think, you know, just to give you an idea, the waterfront grandstand, we should see that big. There'll be a seat for every person. You'll have access to lounge around the race stadium when we're opening up. There'll be food and beverage vendors there. And every single person will be able to see and listen to the music. And then the premium lounge will have the kind of front of house access there, be able to have the kind of golden circle to the music, as well as a champagne reception and what have you. But without further ado, I'll stop the recording. Thank you for listening to me go on.